All right, I want my amazing panel to weigh in because it's a good one. MSNBC political analyst and Washington Post White House bureau chief Phil Rucker, Republican strategist, Evan Siegfried, and MSNBC political contributor Maya Harris. Evan, I want to start with you. We were saying that President Trump meeting with the Republican establishment, he golfed with Rand Paul and Lindsey Graham this weekend. But based on what Lindsey Graham had to say this weekend, it sounds like Lindsey Graham himself is putting out a dire warning for Mitch McConnell. Take a listen.
If we don't cut taxes and we don't eventually repeal and replace Obamacare, then we're going to lose across the board in the House in 2018. And all of my colleagues running in primaries in 2018 will probably get beat. It will be the end of Mitch McConnell as we know it.
There you go. It'll be the end of Mitch McConnell as we know it.
I think PolitiFact would call it true because Republicans came in. We had both chambers of Congress and the presidency. We had an unprecedented lineup set for us to get everything we wanted to do on our agenda done. We should have had repeal and replace done. We should have had infrastructure. We should have had tax reform all done by now. What do we have to show for it that we can hang our hats on as a party? We have Neil Gorsuch, and I don't think voters across the country are going to say, that's a really great job just getting a Supreme Court justice.
That's a huge win, though.
It is a huge win, and it's going to be the lasting legacy. But how does it impact somebody on Main Street? How do they have some extra money in their pockets because they've gotten tax relief? How do they have the health care being lower for the cost?
You know, that's a beautiful point, because true conservatives love the Neil Gorsuch appointment, but all those forgotten Americans who hadn't even necessarily voted for a Republican before voted for President Trump because they wanted something different. Philip, now we have seen Trump attack Mitch McConnell over and over again, specifically on health care. What do we think is going to happen here? I mean, the two of them need a win. Or does Trump really need a win, or does he just want to keep going after McConnell?
Well, you're right that there's been so much public animosity in this relationship, but they both need a win. They both understand the stakes. And some Republican senators are pretty optimistic, actually, that behind closed doors and in private, and importantly, with Vice President Pence as a mediator of sorts, that they'll be able to get on the same page. Trump just wants something to sign. He wants a bill done. He wants a signature piece of legislation, and he wants to have a big, beautiful ceremony and have these tax cuts go through. And so does McConnell. And so there's some hope from Republican senators that I've talked to over the weekend that this can actually, that they can make some progress and get over the difficulties they've had in their relationship.
Maya, he's right. President Trump loves signing something, but does he need Mitch McConnell, or is he just going to ring up Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer?
They need each other, and you know, they've got a codependency thing that's happening here. Trump needs a legislative win. He hasn't moved any single legislative item on his 100-day agenda. McConnell needs a win as well. As you were saying, I mean, they have a unified government for the first time in many years, and they have not gotten anything done, which puts, you know, in jeopardy the Senate majority. But I also think that this is a little complicated when you start to factor in someone like Bannon, because, you know, I mean, Trump needs McConnell for tax reform, but he also can't risk alienating Bannon. And Bannon has masterfully made himself the kind of keeper of Trump's base. And ultimately, you know, that's...
And Trump loves that base way more than he likes dining with Mitch McConnell.
Well, exactly. And so Trump needs the very establishment that Bannon is trying to take down. And so I think it, you know, makes for some tricky triangulation for Donald Trump about how he's going to forge the alliance he needs with Mitch McConnell, but, you know, make sure that he's not looking like he's too close to the establishment in a way that ultimately he might unleash those same very forces against his own presidency if he's not careful.
All right, well, let's talk about the president and another Republican lawmaker that he has certainly battled with, Bob Corker. Corker is saying that Trump's actions are creating binary choices between war with countries like North Korea and Iran or allowing those countries to obtain nuclear weapons. Quote, "You cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State without giving yourself that binary choice." And I want to share the response from Rex Tillerson and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
I checked, I'm fully intact.
That is just so much drama. I mean, it's all this palace intrigue. I am glad to be living in New York just for that reason, is that I don't want to be near the drama and I don't want to be near the gossip.
Okay, brother, please, I'm going to you, Phil Rucker. You know this White House better than anyone. Are we actually going to believe that Nikki Haley, being in New York, is separated from the drama? No way, Jose.
Well, let's just first say what an extraordinary moment that was where the Secretary of State had to publicly say that on television. That's something else.
I'm fully intact. That's so gross.
But Nikki Haley is a member of this cabinet. She's actually going to be here in Washington today. She's very involved in these national security discussions and very involved in the drama that's taking place behind the scenes and trying to figure out this president's response to issues like North Korea and the Iran deal. She's front and center in that mix. And so she may not physically be in D.C. She may not be the one everybody's gossiping and speculating about all the time like Tillerson, but she's in the middle of this.
All right, then, Evan, what's your thought here? I mean, for Nikki Haley to say, I want to stay away from the drama, I mean, there's zero chance that's true.
I think she does want to publicly look like she's staying away from the drama. This is somebody who wants to be Secretary of State or possibly even be a presidential candidate in 2024 or 2028. And she wants to have that distance because Washington itself is so toxic.
But she doesn't have that distance.
On paper, she does. And I think that's the perception she's trying to play up. Nikki Haley is intimately involved in this administration's foreign policy. And she has to be by virtue of her position. She was intimately involved in Syria in our response to gassing men, women, and children. And I think that the more Nikki Haley can publicly distance herself from Washington, that's better for her as well, and it gives her more moral standing because Washington, D.C., everybody's trying to knife one another in the back.
Then from a strategy standpoint, why would Nikki Haley want to be Secretary of State, given how toxic things are in that White House? Why would Nikki Haley want to move herself to D.C. and be Secretary of State when she can kind of sit pretty and continue to get these high marks as ambassador to the UN? Maya? Well,
I mean, it's one of the most powerful positions in any administration, so it's certainly not something to necessarily want to, rule out of hand. But I also think that this whole back and forth between Tillerson and Haley and what their relationship is, on the one hand, it is very indicative of this White House. There's always the kind of who's up, who's down, who's fighting with whom. In the White House. But it's really, in this context, I mean, it's very serious. I mean, it is really an issue of our national security. You see Tillerson putting out one point of view. You see Haley putting out another point of view on Iran. And it really evidences the sort of lack of a coherent policy and leadership coming from this president, which is no way to run a White House. And now what you're seeing is this jockeying that's occurring where, people are trying to fill the vacuum in public with their own point of view. And I think that ultimately that is a problem for us in terms of national security and the signal that it sends both to our allies and our adversaries.
All right, Philip, let's talk about the well-oiled machine, the White House that only hires the best people. You were part of this story just broken this morning inside the adult daycare center, how aides tried to control and coerce Trump. Take us inside the White House. What's going on?
Yeah, so my colleague Ashley Parker did a great job with this piece. We took the quote that Bob Corker had about the adult daycare center and figured out what that really means and what's going on behind the scenes. And what we found is that a lot of these aides really do try to manipulate the president and treat him in some ways like a child, and certainly talk about him that way in private. And when there's a decision that he wants to make that they feel like is calamitous or reckless or politically damaging for him in some way, they do have tricks. They try to slow walk it. They try to delay it. They say, Mr. President, we'll look into that and get back to you. And then, you wait a couple weeks and they don't actually get back to him and hope he forgets about it. But there are all sorts of tricks that they have developed to try to deal with him and his impulses. Because as we know, this is a president who governs by impulse.
Are any of them working? I mean, in this piece, you've got Larry Summers quoted calling Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, the biggest sycophant cabinet member in history. So these tricks might keep them from getting screamed at by the president, but are they actually impactful in any way?
Well, a lot of aides will tell you, you have no idea the things that we've stopped. I don't know exactly what those are, but
you know what? They tell me that all the time, too. That one is so tiring. Yeah. You don't know what goes on behind the scenes. You're right. I'm scared.
But you're right about it not working entirely. There are a lot of decisions that even the president's own cabinet feels like have been reckless that they've gone forward with. The Paris Climate Accord, there was great disagreement internally about that, and there was a fear that would disrupt a lot of our alliances in the West. And then as most recently as the Iran deal, where a number of the national security officials were urging the president not to take the step that he ended up taking.
Evan, take us inside. When you look at the president's surrogates, his cabinet, his senior advisors, his cabinet members, they surely refute this adult daycare center kind of claim by Bob Corker. But you know people who actually work on the line inside that White House as part of the RNC. What are they telling you it's like?
Morale is horribly low. Younger to mid-level staffers don't want to be there and are looking for the exit ramp. And that's pretty astounding for this early in any sort of presidency. I think that John Kelly has actually done a much better job than his predecessor in controlling the flow of information to the president. And I think many people are very happy he's there because the president would have somebody just slip him a note saying, hey, here's this article. And it could have been from InfoWars. And then the president launches a commission to find out why the frogs are being turned gay or something like that. And I think that we have gotten better, but we saw it again this morning. The president is out and he's attacking Chuck Schumer again now. And I think that he thinks it's going to be fun, and he's calling Democrats obstructionist. But there is no coherent message, and it also goes to what Phil was talking about, in that a lot of stuff has been done haphazardly without being thought out. We pulled out of UNESCO last week, and Israel was taken by surprise and is very upset with us as a result. That's one of our closest allies, whom the president talks about as being hand in glove. And I think that they need to have a much more strategic thinking and get the president on the same page and outline what the Trump doctrine is for foreign policy, for domestic policy even, because at times he loves things and then he hates it. It's a Jekyll and Hyde.
Well, if you remember, he told CBS, I stand for nothing. While we've been speaking, he's not just tweeting calling Democrats obstructionists. He just tweeted and he said, if crooked Hillary Clinton is going to run in 2020, my answer was, I hope so. Across the board, Democrats have so much that they could say about, I mean, they could just fact check the president day in and day out and prove that he's a liar. But what they also haven't proven is, what's their strategy? In truth, yes, it's not going to be Hillary Clinton in 2020, but what do Democrats need to do besides saying, get this guy out?
Well, absolutely. You have to come up with a affirmative vision for the American people and how people's lives are going to be better under a Democratic administration as opposed to a Republican administration, in particular as it relates to their economic security. So there is an absolute affirmative case and message that needs to be put forward by the Democrats. But it is certainly going to be something to build on, that all of the actions of this White House and the chaos and the dysfunction has led to the exact opposite, which is nothing has so far moved forward for the American people. We're, alienating our allies. We're emboldening our adversaries. And so there is certainly that piece of it for the Democrats to build on as well. But the affirmative vision is going to be key, because people want to vote for something, not just against something.
I just think, Philip, what do you hear in Washington? I mean, Democrats have so much that they could go on to go after the president, but there isn't a clear message, and there's certainly not a clear face of leadership.
And there's also a concern that we're now 9 months in, and some of these things that were so extraordinary from this president early on are sort of baked into the atmosphere, and we're used to it. We're used to the mistruths and misstatements and exaggerations and impulsive decisions, and it's not as shocking to the American people anymore. And that's a challenge for Democrats when they're thinking ahead to 2018 and even 4 years down the road to 2020, how to run against him and what to seize on, and what will really get voters agitated to vote him out of office, what will excite them and engage them.
Yeah, I would just leave it at, listen, we heard over and over from those who are sort of Trump apologists who accept that he tells lies or exaggerates, and they've said over and over, watch what he does, not watch what he says. The problem is he hasn't actually done much on a legislative front.
This is not my war. This is our war. And you all didn't start it. The establishment started it.
Former Goldman Sachs managing director Steve Bannon speaking about the establishment, drawing battle lines against the GOP establishment in a speech at the Values Voter Summit this weekend in D.C. Bannon ratcheted up his brand of populist rhetoric and slammed the GOP agenda. With me now, national political reporter for NBC News, Jonathan Allen, and Evan Siegfried back with me. First, I want to play for you what Bannon said about his enemy number one, Senate Majority Leader. Wait, and I just want to remind you, when Steve Bannon goes after the establishment over and over and goes after globalists and capitalists, let's remember he is financed by the Mercer family. Robert Mercer, the co-founder of Renaissance, one of the largest and most profitable hedge funds on the planet, a planet currently in dispute with back taxes to the tune of almost $7 billion. All right, here's what he said about Mitch McConnell.
All of you folks that are so concerned that you're going to get primaried and defeated, you know, there's time for mea culpa. You can come to a stick and condemn Senator Corker. And you can come to a microphone, and you can say, I am not going to vote for Mitch McConnell for majority leader.
Jonathan, if you were Mitch McConnell, would this worry you?
It would worry me, because what happens with these intimidation campaigns, the sort of guerrilla warfare that Steve Bannon and his allies are running, is they're simply going to try to put fear into a couple of senators, maybe knock off a few, or at least put them in the position of losing primaries or having to fight tough primaries, and that tends to erode Mitch McConnell's support. If your goal is to take out the Senate Majority Leader rather than necessarily advance an agenda directly, it's a lot easier to do that and to claim some measure of victory.
Evan, what in God's name has happened to the Republican Party, my friend?
We're in the middle of a civil war. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is what is happening. And Steve Bannon wants to be that chaos agent and burn it to the ground.
Why should you be in the middle of a civil war? You have everything. You won everything.
Because we haven't gotten results in the legislature. And that's what happens. We begin to panic. We begin turning on one another. It's Mitch McConnell's fault, because Mitch McConnell, he just has to say the word and everybody will vote the way he wants it. No, when you're majority leader, dealing with all of those senators, it's still like herding cats, and that might actually be easier. What we're seeing Bannon doing, he's attacking Bob Corker. He is attacking Mike Pence today in the New Yorker. He said that Mike Pence is too close to the Koch brothers and therefore controlled. So Steve Bannon's answer, we're going to primary everybody who doesn't, in the Republican Party, who doesn't follow our point of view. And the last time Steve Bannon did something like this was 2010. And you know who those candidates were that he put up to primary people? Todd Akin, Christine O'Donnell, and other nuts, Sharon Angle, who cost Republicans Senate seats and made it impossible for us to win because they were so outside of the mainstream. If Steve Bannon wants to help Democrats in
But that was 2010. That was a different world. That was before income inequality got as exaggerated as it is. Jonathan, Steve Bannon, more dangerous outside the White House than he is inside?
Depending on one's perspective,
Good
definitely
point.
more dangerous for the establishment Republicans from outside the White House. If he's in the White House, he's co-opted. I mean, we've already seen that he wants to claim himself as sort of the guardian of Trumpism, whether or not President Trump is always able to guard Trumpism as well from the White House. The second you get into that seat of power, the more concessions you have to make to try to get consensus, to try to get all the stakeholders involved. Bannon likes being a purist. He likes his weapons of war, as he sort of talks about them. And from out there, he can take a lot of shots at a lot of people within the Republican Party.
The irony, the term purist among a group of people, values, the whole thing blows my mind. You think Mitch McConnell could get replaced, Evan, if we don't get tax reform through?
I think Mitch McConnell could face serious pressure from outside of the Senate, but who would replace him? Who among Republican senators can inspire the confidence and understands the body and the intricacies of it better than Mitch McConnell? I don't know that person. And even Ted Cruz doesn't know that person.
All right, Jonathan, before we go, Evan is saying in 2010, we saw Steve Bannon try to do this and bring fringe candidates to get elected, and he failed, and it hurt the Republican Party. But in your new article on NBCnews.com, you say he doesn't need to win every election. He just needs to wreak havoc, and he's certainly doing that.
Absolutely. Kerry Geiger and I talked to a lot of people who are involved in the conservative movement and the anti-establishment movement. And what they're saying is, look, if we bat 400, we're in the Hall of Fame. What they want to do is take out a couple of people. So if they support 15 candidates and they win 2 of those races, there's going to be a huge intimidation factor across the board with other Republican lawmakers.
My God, this drama ain't going away anytime soon. Gentlemen, thank you so much.